When people hear the word grief, most of the time they think about death. And as I was growing up, I only thought people grieved the loss of a person. I had attended many funerals and had to say goodbye to many family members over time. And while that is absolutely grief, it's not the only kind. There are many forms of grief. And today, I'm going to talk about a kind of grief that doesn't come with casseroles or sympathy cards. A kind of grief that shows up quietly and can change everything about how you live, even though no one died. That grief is what happens after a diagnosis. Today, we're talking about grief after a recent health diagnosis, and I want to say this very clearly. This is real grief. When life changes suddenly, when your sense of safety shifts, when the future you assume you were walking toward no longer looks the same. This episode is personal for me because recently my son was diagnosed with epilepsy at the age of 4. And while he is still here, still my child, and still himself, nothing about life feels the same as it did before that moment. And that is grief. Welcome to Highlight Your Healing. I'm Shannon Roan, grief coach, founder of J&J Journals. This podcast is for women navigating grief and learning to heal with faith. If you've ever received a recent diagnosis for yourself or for someone you love and felt scared or just disoriented in the ways you couldn't fully explain, I want you to know that you are not alone. And more importantly, I want you to know that what you're feeling deserves to be named. A diagnosis usually comes with a moment. That could look like a phone call, a hospital room, a doctor's office, lab results. A sentence that lands heavier than you expect. And even if you don't remember every word, your body remembers the feeling. For me, there's a clear before and after. Before my son's epilepsy diagnosis, life as I knew it felt familiar. I knew what to expect from our days. I knew what normal looked like for my family. And I wasn't constantly being on high alert or just checking for something that's unusual. But after August 15th, that all changed. And it was by far, the scariest day of my entire life. Receiving that phone call from daycare that my child was having a seizure and they were calling an ambulance, I can't even put into words how that moment felt. I'm pretty sure I was driving at least 90 miles per hour and doing everything illegal on the highway to get to my baby. My mom even called my dad and asked him to call me in an attempt to try to calm me down because she knew I would do any and everything to get to my baby. That day was so traumatic for me. My son was rushed to triage and all I knew to do was just drop to my knees and pray. We've never experienced anything like this. There were social workers that came into the room and a chaplain, which I later learned that's protocol for the hospital. And I really felt like this just really has to be a dream. This cannot be happening right now. And after a 4-day hospital stay with 2 of those days in the pediatric ICU, we were finally able to take our son home. And suddenly, every day required more awareness, more planning, more caution. There were new questions, new responsibilities, and new fears that I didn't know how to turn off. And even though my child was still right in front of me, I felt like something had been taken. That loss is just so hard to explain to people who've never experienced it. Because no one died, but yet something ended. The version of life where we didn't have to think about medications, seizures, having an emergency plan, or even worst case scenario, that version is gone. And it's okay to grieve that. Grief after diagnosis doesn't always look like sadness at first. Often it can look like being in shock. You go into problem-solving mode, or you start researching, you start asking questions. and you start doing whatever it needs to be done. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, grief starts to sneak in. Because a diagnosis changes how you see the future. It changes how you plan, how you feel in your body, and it changes how safe the world feels. You may even find yourself thinking, what does this mean long term? Will life ever feel normal again? How do I protect them? Or how do I live with this? These questions are not signs of negativity. They are signs that your mind is trying to adjust to this new information. Grief is the process of adjusting to a reality that you did not choose. And a diagnosis forces that adjustment. One of the hardest parts of grief after diagnosis is that the losses are often invisible. You grieve the ease of life that you used to have, the sense of safety you didn't know you had, the ability to just fully relax, the version of parenting or living that felt uncomplicated. And after my son's epilepsy diagnosis, there were things I had to start carrying that I never had to carry before. Emergency medicine, constant awareness of his body, questions about even what activities would be safe for him, thoughts about school, sleep, stress, and triggers. That constant alertness is exhausting. And even when things are stable, your body stays on guard. That is grief living in the nervous system. One of the loneliest parts of grief after a diagnosis is how misunderstood it can be. People, they may say things like, at least it's manageable, or at least you caught it early, or at least he's okay. And while those things may be true, they don't erase the grief. You can be grateful and grieving at the same time. You can be thankful for treatment and yet still mourn what changed. Grief is not ungratefulness. It is an honest response to loss. And when people minimize this kind of grief, even unintentionally, it can make you feel like you need to downplay what you're carrying. But you don't. This grief is valid, even if it doesn't look like what people expect. After a diagnosis, life doesn't just change emotionally. It changes practically. You could be grieving a diagnosis of diabetes, or maybe high blood pressure, cancer, lupus, or whatever it may be. You move differently through your day. You think differently about time. You notice things you never paid attention to before. For me, there's always a quiet check happening in the background. Is he okay right now? Did he sleep well? Do we have what we need if something happens? See, that constant awareness becomes a part of your life. And while you may adjust over time, that adjustment doesn't mean that the grief disappears. It means that you just learned how to carry it. Grief after diagnosis is not about being sad all the time. It's about living with a new layer of responsibility and uncertainty. And that can take a toll on you. Many parents and caregivers feel guilt about grieving after a diagnosis. They often think that they shouldn't feel this way, or that they just need to be strong, or I can't fall apart. But strength does not mean ignoring your feelings. And grieving does not mean that you love your child any less. It means that you care deeply about the life they're living and the challenges that they now face. There's no award for pretending that this doesn't affect you, okay? Giving yourself permission to grieve allows you to show up more fully and not less. Grief after a diagnosis can raise some hard questions. You may wonder, why did this happen? You may feel angry, confused, or even disappointed. You may struggle to pray the way you used to. None of that means that your faith is weak. See, faith doesn't remove grief. It helps you carry it. See, I've learned that trusting God doesn't mean pretending that any of this is easy. It just means acknowledging that this is hard and asking for strength today, not answers for everything. God is not offended by your grief. He is not distant because you're struggling. He is present right there in the middle of all of it. I want to share just a few things that's helped me begin to cope with this kind of grief. First, naming it. Calling it grief gave me language for what I was feeling. It helped me stop judging myself and start understanding myself. Second, giving myself permission to allow my emotions to exist without trying to fix it. See, some days feel heavy, but there are some days that it feels just a little more manageable, and both of those are allowed. Third, grounding myself in the present. See, I don't try to solve the future all at once. I just focus on it day by day. And finally, reminding myself that grief and hope can exist together. My son is here. He is loved. He is strong. And this diagnosis is just a part of our story, not the whole story. If you're listening and you're grieving after a diagnosis, whether it be yours or someone you love, I want you to hear this. You are not weak. You are not being dramatic. You are adjusting to a life that changed, and that adjustment deserves compassion. Give yourself permission to grieve what was lost, even as you care for what is. And here's something simple that you can reflect on this week. Ask yourself, what changed after the diagnosis that I haven't fully acknowledged? There's no right answer here. Naming it doesn't make it heavier. It often makes it just a little easier to carry. And I want to end this episode by saying this. Grief is not only about death. It's about change. It's about the loss of what you expected. It is about learning how to live in a world that feels different than it did before. A diagnosis can bring all of that at once. And if you're walking through that kind of grief, you are not alone. You don't have to minimize it. You don't have to rush through it. You don't have to pretend that it doesn't affect you. Your grief is real. Your love is real. And your strength is not measured by how little you feel. Thank you for listening. And thank you for holding space for this conversation. If this episode spoke to you, follow the podcast and leave a review. It helps another woman find this space. And until next time, continue to highlight your healing.